Howdy friendos, my name is Stuart, and I'm going to make this short. I see a lot of people complain about Turning Red online, or others defending the movie as some masterpiece, and then when Twitter gets divided like this, I either fully lean into it, or I tend to avoid it entirely. For example, check out my redo of Healer video. However, last night, I finally took a few hours off, and I caught up on several things that I'm supposed to be watching as an online content creator. I watched Moon Knight, Encanto, and then Turning Red in that order. You should probably expect a video on Moon Knight at some point, but I'm not certain if I ever want to make videos on those other two movies. But I do want to take a moment to talk about the themes and the making of those films. If you haven't seen Encanto or Turning Red, Encanto is a movie about a magical family who have been granted amazing gifts via a miracle candle. The household is headed by a grandmother who has high expectations of everyone. Their magically gifted family acts as the town guardians, handymen, and advisors. Their marriages tend to be arranged and they are under immense pressure, drip, 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 to be perfect. The main character is a girl named Mirabelle who, for whatever reason, did not receive a gift, and she does her best to keep up with the rest of her family. One day, during one of the cousins' gifting ceremonies, she noticed cracks in her family house and tried to tell Abuela about it, but gets humiliated and the party moves on. The plot continues as Mirabelle investigates the cracks in the house and the dying miracle. Eventually, we learn that the family magic is dying because all of the members of the house are being pulled apart due to Abuela's overbearing expectations and control. Mirabelle saves her family by crossing the generational divide and shows her appreciation for the older generation, but insists that the younger generation should be allowed to move on and make their own decisions. Keep this in mind. Turning Red is a movie about a 13-year-old Asian-Canadian girl named Mei Ling living in Toronto with her high expectations Asian mother. During the movie, she learns that she can transform into a giant red panda during emotional bouts. Once the family realizes this, Mei's mother reveals that this is an inconvenience that needs to be banished through a magic ritual that can only occur during a red moon. However, Mei learns to handle her powers on her own thanks to her emotional stability she gets from her friends. But as the movie progresses, we see Mei's grandmother come to town, and we learn that the family's magic is going out of control and the members of the house are being pulled apart due to Mom's overbearing expectations and control. Mei saves her family by crossing the generational divide and shows her appreciation for the older generation, but insists that the younger generation should be allowed to move on and make their own decisions. Sound familiar? Am I oversimplifying it a bit? Yeah, but basically speaking, we have two movies here that have extremely similar story arcs and resolutions. I'll briefly talk about their reception, but this is more of a side note. It's not the point I want to focus on, but I do want to address some controversies, I guess. People love Encanto. The director has gone on record to state that she went out of her way to make this as Broadway of a production as possible, and musicals tend to get a lot of leeway because it can be carried by their music and not necessarily their plot. Turning Red is not a musical and instead chooses to put a lot of its story and themes on aspects of puberty, specifically female puberty. When Mei discovers that she can turn into a panda, her mom at first thinks she's getting her first period, and the movie is very overt about it. I personally liked Turning Red a lot more than Encanto. Encanto is an okay movie that has very ambitious musical ambitions, and that's pretty much what anyone talks about when you talk about the movie. The plot rarely comes up in any online discussion other than people going, "Oh, it made me cry." Yeah, it's designed to. And that's because people focused way harder on the musical numbers, and I just don't get into musicals, at least not like I used to. Since Turning Red has put its story and message first, there's a lot less to distract people. It has to stand on its own. And I actually really respect what the movie was doing, but the metaphor is definitely awkward. During the course of Turning Red, the girls decide that they want to go to a concert, and to do that, they start selling panda merchandise and photo ops with other students. Now, if the panda is meant to be a metaphor for womanhood, and this 13-year-old girl is selling pictures of her panda to other students, people get confused, and this comes off as creepy and weird. And this is actually the exact same problem I had with Steven Universe. Fusion in that show was a metaphor for a lot of things. One of those things was about sex, and there was an episode where it was all about consent, and it was really, really blatant about the sexual aspect of it. and it got weird, and that stuck with me and a lot of other people, and I don't like it because Steg exists, and no. I think the problem most people have with Turning Red is that people aren't sure where the metaphor begins and the world that we're presenting ends. So, like, when the panda appears, it's obviously a metaphor for womanhood and puberty, but also, this girl turns into a giant red panda in her world. That's really cool. Are you telling me you wouldn't pay $5 to see a giant talking red panda and learn that magic exists? Really? You wouldn't pay $5 Canadian, what is that, $3 in real money, to prove that magic is real and this Asian kid can transform at will? Metaphor or not, that is mind-blowing in this universe, and it makes sense that these girls would exploit that to go see a concert. Again, the actions she makes in this universe makes sense. I mean, in fact, when I was younger, I was always scheming to make money, and of course, if I had the opportunity to utilize magic to do it, I would do it. So, it's kind of reasonable to be confused on this. Movies nowadays are so drenched in metaphor and allegory, it's almost weirder when something is presented at face value. So I do understand the confusion when I say people say they find Turning Red a little gross, because at some points you're expected to think critically about what you're seeing on screen, and then at other seemingly random points you're just supposed to accept what you're seeing as the reality of the world. But like I said, that's not what I want to focus on today. I just wanted to bring that up and just say, guys, chill about the panda. It's sloppy, but it's fine. My problem with these films is the meta of the message of the films, if that's going to make sense. A while ago, I posted on my Twitter, and I said that Millennials definitely wrote both Encanto and Turning Red, because these movies basically boil down to, my parents suck, and both of these ladies of these movies had to make peace with their over-controlling matriarchs. Now, they're also telling these stories in a very modern tone. A giant portion of these movies can be summarized to a struggle between parent and child, and that's not unusual, that's nothing new. One of the most famous parent-child struggles is Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, but unlike in Star Wars, these movies are hitting a much different message, where Luke and Vader had ideological differences via religion and the Force, I guess, and Kanto and Turning Red are all about parental expectations versus self-fulfillment and reality. The grandmother of Encanto used her power and influence over the family to project this illusion of perfection, while the mother of Turning Red turned her daughter into her pet project, but is also expecting perfection from her as well. Both of these stories are basically struggles almost exclusively to a generation completely different than the target demographic, at least I think. So Gen X and Millennials are getting older. I'm now 30, how old am I? I'm 32, and we're now creating stories for Disney and Pixar, and while Encanto had a relatively older writing staff, Turning Red's lead director and writer is a millennial, and based a lot of her writing in this movie on personal experiences. Jury's still out on the magical transformations, though. It's clear that these projects are very personal experiences for the creator, and I'm not certain that's really a good thing. To me, it looks like these films are meant to be a catharsis for the creator, and they're not really taking the time to design a story for today's Gen Z children. If anything, it feels like the target demographic of this movie is the Twitter crowd, so like millennials and people my age. I was a teacher 5 years before I switched to YouTube full-time, and there are no millennials left in school. They're all gone. Millennials are now grown up, and they're having kids of their own, and there's a new group of kids that are now in school and have a much different set of problems. The idea of an overbearing, pressure-induced, unaware of parent is a very boomer mentality. The discourse online has always been boomers are old and out of touch, and they're forcing their ideas and expectations on us while we're tired of it. But like, that's not necessarily the struggles of the current generation. The message of this serious cross-generational issue is almost too little too late. Gen Z is here, and they have different needs from their films. And again, one of the things I liked about these movies is that it does give a healthy perspective into the lives of the older generations, you know, boomer parents. And I think Encanto and Turning Red is good, but it's a very awkward trend to be moving. Turning Red is actually set in 2002, and during that time, the director Domi Shi, I'm sorry if I said that name wrong, would have been 13 and in 8th grade. And Turning Red seems almost autobiographical in nature. Again, jury's still out on magic puberty, but it's bizarre that Pixar seemingly funded what seems like her self-therapy project. The conflict of these two movies are boomers suck and they're forcing their expectations on us young folks. And yeah, they have their reasons, but they need to let us go. Yeah, that lesson isn't really for young girls. That lesson is for mom. Is this movie for your mom? Like, who is this for? Millennials and Gen X are getting older, and, you know, like, we're in our 30s and 40s now, and I think it would be more helpful if we produce movies on what millennial parents are like and how they're affecting Gen Z, because that's relevant and that's important now. And I guess based on these trends, millennials are just going to do what they're doing, and we'll find out how that affected Gen Z 15 years from now when we fund their self-therapy projects. I don't know. I liked both of these films. I'm just noticing that there's a pattern that we're not really talking about, and these coming-of-age stories are almost overly specific life experiences. Granted, again, I liked them, and I related to both of these movies, but I am also a 31-year-old millennial who had an over-expecting mother. Am I the target demographic? Who's this for? And I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking this, but I don't know. Maybe Anthony at least appreciates that I paid him for more editing work. I don't know. Maybe you guys like more content. I'm sorry that this. I did write a script for this, but I'm sorry this is a little bit more freeform than what I typically do. But I do have complicated feelings about these movies, and I really want to hear what your thoughts are down below. Like, again, I think especially Turning Red was good, and I like that it addressed girl puberty in a very direct way. But again, the meta and the message of the story doesn't necessarily seem for the 13-year-old. It seems more for mom. And to me, that's concerning. Or at least awkward. I don't know. Let me hear your thoughts. This was a bit of a stream of consciousness. Again, I did write a script, but I'm going off script a lot. Thank you to the patrons, and I'll see you next time.